Like, think of yourself if you were.
Recording in progress.
Yes.
Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to Climate Action Now's first of two forums for candidates in Northampton's upcoming city elections. My name is Lily Lombard. I'm a member of Climate Action Now. Before we leap into this forum, I want us to pause and collectively recognize why tonight's candidate forum on climate, energy, and the environment is imperative and grave. The UN Secretary General called the latest report on the International Panel on Climate Change, quote, a code red for humanity. With only massive and immediate cuts in carbon emissions, capable of averting a tipping point, after which feedback loops for warming will reinforce even greater warming, more severe climate chaos, and wholesale civil disruption and ecologic breakdown. Meanwhile, we're amidst the sixth greatest extinction period our planet has ever faced, caused largely by human exploitation and habitat destruction. Published last week in the Lancet Medical Journal, a survey on every continent of 10,000 youth aged 16 to 25 showed that 83% feel that humans have failed to care for the planet. And 2/3 believe government responses to climate change are failing young people. The article reports that their complex and painful emotions of betrayal, abandonment, fear, guilt, shame, powerlessness, and depression appear to be greater when young people believe that government response is inadequate. So let's for a moment name our shared peril and acknowledge the legitimate and significant emotional distress of youth the world over, including ones we love. Now, at the same time, lest we become paralyzed, let's raise up human agency and strength. BBC's chief climate journalist, Justin Rowlett, who has a front seat to this awesome planetary challenge, made this remark, quote, the defining human characteristic is actually our ability to cooperate. Our ability to solve problems together explains the dominance our species has achieved. The defining human characteristic is our ability to cooperate and solve problems together. Tonight's forum features 5 candidates for Northampton's at-large city council position, who will be on the primary ballot next Tuesday, September 28th, 4 of whom will advance to the general election on Tuesday, November 2nd. Michelle Serra, Michael Quinlan, Jamila Gore, David Murphy, and Marissa Elkins. So I'm going to briefly introduce Climate Action Now, lay out our flight plan for tonight, then turn things over to Ben Weil to moderate our event. Ben is a UMass Sustainable Building Scientist, a Leeds resident, and a member of Northampton's Energy and Sustainability Commission. Climate Action Now is a grassroots, all-volunteer group dedicated to building a powerful regional climate justice movement through organizing, action, and public education. It was founded in 2012, has 2,500 supporters, and fiercely advocates for bold climate policy at all levels of government municipal, state, and federal, and has successfully rallied grassroots action to stop construction of the Palmer biomass power plant in Springfield, to defeat a large cross-state gas pipeline and the expansion of natural gas supply to Northampton, and pass legislation that ensures that climate justice be considered in all statewide energy decisions. CAN welcomes, urges you to join our movement. You can visit climateactionnowma.org. Okay, so on to logistics. Only candidates, the moderator, and our timekeeper will have their audio and video on. And actually, our moderator is the timekeeper in tonight's event. So candidates and moderator on the screen. Everyone else, please keep your microphone and your video off. And if you need to do that now, turn your video off, please do. We want to be able to focus on the panel. We're recording this forum and live streaming it on the following platforms: TV Channel 12 and Northampton Open Media's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch pages, where folks can also access the recording after tonight. Links to these platforms are in the chat. The chat at the bottom of your screen will serve two functions. One, reporting or asking about tech issues, and you can select tech/Martin. Or two, submitting candidate questions, and you can select questions/Adele. And we may also pop relevant links into the chat. To access closed captions, select CC at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click Show Subtitles. Okay, the flight plan will go as follows. First, candidates will make 3-minute opening remarks. Second, Ben will ask candidates 3 rounds of questions with 2-minute replies. And in some cases, Ben will follow up with 1-minute follow-up questions. In round 1, Ben will ask the same question of all the candidates. In round 2, Ben will pose unique questions to each candidate. And in round 3, candidates will choose to respond to any of the previously asked questions that they wish. So candidates, take note of the questions that you found interesting in round 2. And then finally, Ben will ask as many audience questions as he's able in the time remaining, with 2 minutes to reply. So thank you everyone for showing up, for your willingness to listen, to learn, to ask hard questions, and to exercise your vote. Now I will exit stage and pass the forum over to our moderator, Ben Weil.
Hello and welcome, candidates. Thank you for participating in tonight's forum. So this will be an opportunity for you to please introduce yourself and your candidacy. What do you want voters to know about you? Though it's not required, you can share your own perspective and connection to the subject of climate, energy, and the environment, and so on. And I'll call on each of you in turn, and you'll each have 3 minutes. So first, I'm going to call on Michelle Sarah.
Hello, I'm Michelle Sarah, and our wonderful city has been my home for 27 years. I care deeply about the people of Northampton and will work with you to build a more thriving and equitable community. I'm honored to be here with Climate Action Now. I believe cities and states must act boldly on climate. The cost of inaction will be far greater. I was a chapter leader with Progressive Democrats of America, PDA, working to advance social, racial, and economic justice. We brought members of Congress here to Northampton for town hall events at First Churches. I believe in healthcare as a human right, the Green New Deal, and adequately funding our new Department of Community Care to advance equitable responses to public safety. I was the Hampshire County Coordinator for Bernie Sanders in 2016, and I'm proud to hold unwavering progressive values. But I'm not living in a bubble. I talk with moderate voters who know me as fair and reasonable, dedicated and informed, and willing to listen to their views. In 2016, Bernie Sanders was mocked when a debate moderator asked, "What is the greatest threat to our national security?" And he answered, "Climate change." His honesty and courage inspired so many of us back when there were far fewer true progressive candidates. I was a board member with Pioneer Valley Habitat for Humanity, where I served as public relations chair and co-chaired the Green Team, which advanced sustainable building practices. We were ahead of the curve, making strides on a shoestring budget. This took vision, it took collaboration and commitment. Our Green Team startup efforts over a decade ago began to lay the groundwork, and since 2018, all Pioneer Valley Habitat new homes have been classified as zero net energy ready homes by the Department of Energy. I'm committed to further advancing all opportunities for affordable, sustainable housing and for alleviating homelessness. I'm proud of the work we have started with Sustainable Northampton and our Emergency Climate Resiliency Plan. It was a member of the Youth Commission, or Sunrise, who asked to add the word emergency to Climate Resiliency Plan. The climate crisis has grown more urgent. With broad consensus, we are facing a tipping point. Now is the time to advance more ambitious climate goals, and I'll be a strong voice for bold collective action. I will work with the council and our new mayor and will advocate for broadening the conversation. Our residents and local groups want to be part of the solution. As your next city councilor at large, I will lead with integrity, listen with compassion, and work with great purpose for the future of our city. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Michael Quinlan next.
Well, first, thank you to Climate Action Now for organizing this forum and inviting me to participate. As Ben said, my name is Michael Quinlan. I'm the city councilor currently in Northampton's Ward 1 and a candidate for councilor at large in this fall's elections. I've lived here in Northampton for almost my entire life. I love this city, and it's been a really great privilege to serve as a councilor. I've learned an awful lot through conversations with Northampton residents. 2 years ago, I participated in a forum hosted by Climate Action Now at the Senior Center. And I declared at that time that I think I'm far from an expert on environmental and climate crisis issues, but I am a very hard worker, and I'm very proud of how much I've learned and engaged with people who have greater expertise than I do. My goal every time I pick up the phone is to learn more and know more when I hang up than when I answer. I find the council work to be based on a series of conversation and then in meetings working together to create consensus around the right ideas for Northampton. It's a 9-member team and no one can go it alone. It requires teamwork. I work for Table and Vine in West Springfield as the manager of fine wine. We deal with wineries from all over the world, from new startups to wineries that are many generations old. These folks often talk about climate crisis and how it impacts their livelihood. Wine is an agricultural product, and the rising temperatures, droughts, floods, and impact of more powerful storms changes how these people live, the same way it changes how we live. I recognize that we must do our part to mitigate what we can. In this forum, we're about to talk about what we would like to do differently or more urgently. I think it's also important that we recognize the city is a leader regionally in our effort to address climate crisis. And that's due to the engagement of concerned residents. These fierce advocates inspire the community and inspire the municipal operation. I hope to be part of this community conversation going forward. Other items I'm interested in working on are a more clear picture for the people of Northampton of what the city does and why and how it does it. The fulfillment of the #1 most important recommendation of the Policing Review Commission, the Department of Community Care. COVID recovery, how we invest in the betterment of our community, not just short-term fixes. So I ask for one of your 2 votes for City Councilor at Large to be a part of these important conversations. You can learn more about me at michaelquinlan.com, and I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And next, David Murphy.
Good evening, everyone. I've not prepared a particular manifesto for you this evening. I've been reading copy for far too long in most of the video presentations, so I just want to chat with you. I spent 14 years on the Northampton City Council. My glasses are all bent here. Spent more than 14 years on the Northampton City Council. I've actually been volunteering for the city of Northampton for 40 years, from cable television in the 70s to the Housing Partnership, Downtown Architectural Control District. I chaired that for 8 years. I was a member of the Board of Assessors before I went on the council, and again after I was on the council. So I've been very engaged with the city for a very long time. And I think I'm probably at 66 the oldest person on this panel tonight. So I've been around for a very, very long time. and have a good historic point of view as to where Northampton is and how Northampton got where it is. This is a very serious subject. Climate issues are a very serious subject. I was involved in beginning the stretch code in Northampton when that came to pass. And that was, a lot of that was to help with the climate problem. I've been managing Childs Park for 25 years, probably the nicest piece of open space in the city of Northampton's downtown area, and planting trees there, 30 or 35 trees a year to replace our stock and to help out with that. I'm in the real estate business. I've been in the real estate business for 42 years. Housing is a big component in this, and improving the quality of the energy efficiency of our housing. And I'm also a real estate appraiser, and part of the Northampton Climate Resilience Plan was to engage real estate people in trying to increase the value to consumers of climate efficiency in houses. They talk about getting realtors and appraisers and the multiple listing service engaged in trying to highlight energy efficiency. I'm a realtor, I'm an appraiser, and I'm also the Western Mass director for the statewide multiple listing service and its financial chairman. So for that portion of the climate resilience and regeneration plan, I'm tuned in on those things very, very much. It is a serious thing. Unfortunately, I think we have to put it into perspective. I think in the material you prepared this evening, you said, we're talking about Northampton. This is an international, this is a planetary scale. We can do what we can do in Northampton. I think we need to be realistic about the fact that we're probably taking this a lot more seriously than many communities in this country are. And this country is taking it more seriously than many nations in the world are, particularly developing nations who are just trying to get energy for the first time. So I think we need to do what we can do here to try and set an example for other communities to follow. I am just concerned that nationally and internationally, we set a goal that is so unrealistic to reach that we set ourselves up for failure, and that some of the younger people involved in this become despondent over the fact that we can't get there. The Paris Accords, I think it's going to be very difficult to reach those goals.
We need to wrap.
We may reach them here.
We need to wrap up this segment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was helpful. So next we're going to Jamila Gore.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jamila Gore, and I have lived in this great city of Northampton for 15 years. I moved here from St. Louis, Missouri to live with my sister, who was a professor at UMass at the time. As a renter, I've lived in 5 of the 7 wards in Northampton, and I believe that climate issues are deeply entrenched with issues of racial and economic justice. And we know that representation matters, and people of color and low-income communities are often left out of the larger conversation about climate, even though they're disproportionately affected the most. There's ways that I felt, excluded from the climate conversation as a woman of color. But honestly, climate justice is kind of in my blood. My dad was raised on a farm. He was on his uncle's farm, and he no longer has that land. But he taught us the value of food resiliency and growing our own food. And even though we lived in the inner city, he had a garden on the side of the house for us to grow tomatoes and cucumbers. And I just last year, as kind of homage to my dad, I got a community garden in the community gardens to try to grow my own food and see what that's like. And I was I had an experience where someone asked me, did I own the plot, or was it a community service that I was doing? And I thought that was one of the kind of racial microaggressions that people of color can face when they're trying to do things to improve their knowledge of the land or climate change. And I also would like to add that as a renter, I've experienced the economic brunt of energy inefficient housing, and we need owners and landlords that don't leave the burden of paying for the high cost of energy bills to their tenants. And if the landlords can't afford that themselves, then the city should come up with a plan to help the landlords upkeep the housing standards that are energy efficient. So I was going to run in 2019 for City Council in Ward 2. However, I chose to be on the front lines of pipeline protests in Louisiana, and work with Indigenous water protectors there. And there I learned a lot about the fossil fuel industry and how it's, it provides jobs for people of color. And we need to really move away from that infrastructure and go to a more renewable energy system of economy for people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Marissa Elkins.
Hi, I'm Marissa Elkins. I live in Ward 2 with my wife and daughter, who attends Jackson Street School. I'm a lawyer, managing partner of the Northampton firm of Elkins, Auer, Rudolph, and Schiff, and I'm currently serving on the city's planning board. I hope you'll go to my website, marissaelkins.com, to see where I stand on other issues not on the menu for this forum. But for tonight, I'd like to thank Climate Action Now, Massachusetts, for organizing this forum and giving us all the opportunity to speak to voters about our plans and ideas for confronting the daunting global climate change crisis. Listen, the thing is that this isn't a matter of benchmarks or failing to meet benchmarks that we're setting ourselves up for failure by aspiring to do more and to do better. Failure here isn't going to be failing to meet benchmarks. It'll be at our doorstep in the form of terrible circumstances and a dismal future for our children. Listen, as the climate crisis results in changing temperatures and weather patterns and more intense and higher frequency of major storms, I'm committed to Northampton being a part of the climate solution. We can't solve it globally, but we can do everything we can here. As city councilor, I'll support and continue to implement the elements of the Sustainable Northampton Plan. I'll push the city to not only fulfill the Northampton Climate Resilience and Regeneration Plan, but yes, I want to more than meet those benchmarks. I want to exceed them. We must act urgently to ensure that all city government buildings and operations are net carbon neutral well before 2030. That's completely in the hands of local government after all. And I believe that by working together, we can get Northampton as a city to net carbon neutral decades before the plan's stated goal of 2050. We can reduce greenhouse gases emissions by at least 85% by increasing building efficiency, replacing sources of electricity generation with renewable energy sources, shifting toward electric vehicle use and alternative forms of transportation, and ensuring that land use patterns in Northampton support the city's goals of becoming net carbon neutral. So, yes, I support the plan. I would advocate for the plan, and I would work that we exceed it because we must. Our children are counting on us. And so I'm happy to have the opportunity here to just talk about this in more detail and how I would work toward that on City Council.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so now we'll move on to round one. And in round one, I'm going to ask one question, and all candidates will get 2 minutes to answer that question. And if it seems appropriate, I may ask a follow-up question based on your answers. So this is the question. When asked, are we in a climate emergency? Northampton's political candidates invariably answer, yes, of course. Emergencies, however, require laser focus, the rallying of resources, and shifts from incrementalism to dramatic response. What is the most impactful action you will commit to as a city councilor, such as the drafting and sponsoring of specific legislation to assist us in reaching our urgent climate goals? And I'm going to call on you in the same order that I called on you originally. So Michelle, Sarah, you're first.
Yes, well, I want to work collaboratively. I want to bring people together. We're going to need everyone on board. I want to utilize my communication skills and whatever experience I have that I would bring to the council. And often once we're outside of the, if you want to call it echo chamber of the people that we talk to who support our ideas and our values, then we're doing that further outreach to gain, grow a broader consensus for action. So I, will work to always, listen, understand the opposing viewpoints, because I think that that's helpful in persuasion. Maintain a respectful dialogue, recognize that we don't have all the answers, and we have so much to learn from each other. I hope my campaign is having an impact. I've talked about climate with every group I've met with, even when they aren't progressive groups. So I feel like it's not just what we're saying, it's how we're communicating and to whom. So broaden the conversation. Our residents and local groups want to be part of the solution. We need to engage far more with the community across the socioeconomic spectrum. And I know that a lot of our people who are following, climate action now are, I know of all ages, but I do know a lot of people who are, older than myself. And I feel that we need to engage, I think, seniors who aren't currently part of the movement, many of whom have grandchildren whose future they care very much about.
Time's up. So yeah, I don't want to let you run over, but thank you very much. And next to Michael Quinlan.
Thank you. As I said in my intro, quite frankly, I'm not an expert on climate crisis. So continuing to listen and remaining open-minded to learning more is something I can do personally. But as a counselor, I have some concerns about a couple different things. But one major one for me is our solid waste enterprise and the impact coming to it when the new plastic reduction ordinance takes effect. I imagine that our businesses selling foods to go, restaurants and retail stores will comply. And I think that many will likely switch from plastics that they're using now to compostables, but probably commercial or industrial compostables. And those are not recyclable. In fact, they can contaminate the recycling stream. So to me, it feels like we need to address this. I know at the transfer station, you can take compostables and turn them in, even the industrial compostables, and turn them in. But that requires an effort in home to separate your recyclables from compostables. So one thing as a counselor, I think that I would like to do is to really take on the arduous task of educating our community and figuring out if we can engage people in doing that separation, so that we're taking these compostables and using them the way they were intended to be used, to break down. So I'd like to also discuss the city maybe investing in its own commercial composting facility. And then again, just a few years ago, we didn't think that anybody would be walking into the grocery store carrying their own grocery bags, but almost everyone's doing it now. So I think this is something we can accomplish to separate compostables from recyclables and clean our solid waste stream. Thank you.
Thanks. And David Murphy, same question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know municipal finance really well, having chaired finance for about 8 years. We don't have room in a Proposition 2.5 control budget to take a lot of initiatives on our own. We need Chris Mason, the energy officer, and the Department of Sustainability, Planning and Sustainability to find grants for us to really make a difference. They're going to have to take the lead on this to see where there's money from the state or federal government that we can apply within the city to make a real difference, because we don't have room in the budget, or at least the budget I know, to do really substantial things. We can do things within zoning because we control that. And with zoning, we essentially spend other people's money by setting requirements for them, like the stretch code, or like the current zoning that requires fossil fuel free heating systems in the expansion of small units. That costs other people's money. We got to spend other people's money. We got to get grants from either the state or federal government, and that's going to come through planning and sustainability or the energy officer, because municipal resources are extremely limited. with our current departments. So meaningful steps are not going to come from somebody on the council cooking up some sort of legislation. It's going to come from us supporting grants that the planning and sustainability people write, or that the energy officer comes up with, so that we can make things happen. We did it with zoning, allowing large photovoltaic arrays to come to the city. We did it through the assessing office and allowing special taxation for them. You know, that's the way we're going to deal with it, not with spending money, but with doing things through zoning and doing things through grants that allow us to spend other people's money, because knowing the city budget like I do, we don't have the funds for that kind of thing. But if we focus what we do have, which is our ability under zoning and our ability with grant writing to assist people, it would be very effective. And I think that's the best route to take in this one.
Okay, thank you very much. And next, Jamila Gore.
So I think that as a city, we need to put funding behind climate emergencies, because emergencies require funding. And so we need to lobby at the state and federal level for that funding. And we can take money from other departments in our community to fund, sustainability officers, to get more people working on climate issues, because it's such a big crisis. And I think that's what we need to do. And I think we also need to vocalize the issue more and make it more of a public issue that people are educated on, because I think a lot of people just don't know about the local level actions that they can take for climate change, or what's going on locally that's affecting us every day with our climate here in Northampton, like gas leaks and things like that. So I think we really need to think about this as a local issue and get the funding for it properly, so that we can address it like it's an emergency, because it needs to have that laser focus of, addressing it like an emergency, talking about it like it's an emergency, educating the public like it's an emergency. And that's how we're going to address the issue in a very laser focused way, I think.
Great, thank you. And Marissa Elkins, last to you.
Now here, I do agree with Councilor Murphy. I agree that the experts and professionals working in our city government, working to capitalize on state and regional partnerships, are going to be key in this effort in the long run. But I do think there is a role for city council here, specifically, and again, Councilor Murphy mentioned this, in the role of zoning. I have, from my position on the planning board, I've had a close-up view of some of the first steps taken to implement the resilience plan. And I think we have a real opportunity to do even more with zoning legislation to encourage, require, incentivize it, you name it, whatever we can do, to encourage developers to build more resilience and regeneration measures into their projects. Ideas like the one in the plan to create a point system in which developers have to meet a minimum point requirement strike me as particularly creative. And what I really appreciate about that is that, as I've heard these various developers come forward with their interesting and creative plans, and which are desperately needed to meet a housing crisis shortage that we also face in the city. A plan like that also affords developers the flexibility to decide among the possible measures for what will both benefit and work toward climate measures, but also work best for their project. Ultimately, though, and this is really important, is I think shot through every decision that comes before the city council, every piece of legislation, even if it's issues that don't necessarily center around climate change, it is that urgent that we need to always think about the impact of whatever we're considering, whatever's before us, whatever maintaining the status quo might mean, what it means and what it says, and how it moves us toward a more resilient, more regenerative, and more sustainable city, and one that contributes toward doing our part to combat global climate change. So I think there's both very key things that we can do and that I would do and look at. And then I would also, I think in my role, look at it throughout every decision.
So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question back at you, and then each one of you gets a chance to elaborate. So my observation is that David Murphy identified a small mechanism, essentially one mechanism, but the question asked, what would you do? So that's prospective, and most of your answer was retrospective. So I want to give each of you a chance, kind of having looked at the mechanisms you actually have available, aside from everybody talked about educating the public. How would you use these mechanisms that were identified to do something related to climate? And I guess I'll go in the same order. So Michelle, Sarah, I'll give you a chance first.
Well, I just do want to mention that, because grants were mentioned, that I personally, I think that we should leave no stone unturned. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't have it at my fingertips, but I believe that planning and sustainability in the latest budget, it's about $26,000 in grants. That just seems like it should be far greater. Again, I don't have it at my fingertips, but it was my recollection. And I think that grants are, an important source of getting us to where we want to be. So I do feel that, engaging the community is part of what I would, bring to the conversation.
This question, first of all, again, I'm trying to focus on mechanisms and prospective action. So Michael Quinlan.
Thank you. Well, I would say, this term, I'm a member of the City Council Subcommittee on City Services. And, the council, calls department heads to meet there and testify before the people of Northampton on the record. I think regular check-ins on our progress in terms of our benchmarks and our goals to be, carbon neutral by 2050, 50% by 2030, 75% by 2040. We should be using this mechanism specifically to have regular check-ins to report to the public on exactly how we're doing here. Are we meeting these objectives? And if not, what action plans need to be put in place to make sure that happens? We have to have measurable goals and accountability, and that's what the council can bring to the executive branch.
Great. And then same question back to David Murphy.
Well, what you need to understand about the council is we do three things in council. We do orders, we do ordinances, and we do resolutions. Resolutions are feel-good things that have no force of law. We just say, we support this, God bless you, here's a resolution. We do orders, most of which are financial in nature. And we do ordinances. Ordinances include zoning. That's where we can help you, is with ordinances. You say, what leadership role can you take? This is a mayor-strong form of government we have. Lots of things happen because the mayor says they happen that don't come to council. We do orders, we do ordinances, and we do resolutions. You can take your pick from one of those three things. That's the only way we can help you. And probably the most effective thing in there is an ordinance. And the most effective ordinance we have is zoning. So as Marissa said, that's probably the most effective way we can take things and make them actually happen and make people actually deal with them.
That's great. Thank you. Jamila?
I think that we can take funding from departments that are overfunded, for instance, like the police department, and we can put that into another sustainability officer or someone else to look at the climate issues in our city. I think that's the best step to take. We just need to use the resources that we have to put more energy towards this specific goal that we have for climate. I feel like there's just not enough importance on it. And I think that it's so tied into all these other things that go on in the city. Like I said, it's tied into racial and economic injustice. So it's all tied in together. So I think we need to put the funding there.
Great. And Marissa, a chance to put some more meat on the bones.
Well, thank you. I guess I would just reiterate that that it really is the case that zoning is probably the place where the city council has the most power to act. So in addition, I am interested in the idea of the sort of menu of measures that we can encourage developers to take. I would also be interested in looking and advancing legislation where we can identify it, other incentive for maybe smaller, newer developments, ways where people have to come before the planning board for certain things, to incorporate more opportunities to let people opt to implement more measures. And I also think there's a key part in for the city to play, the government, those professionals that I talked about, to maximize opportunities for people coming before the board and with their projects to get help with it, to be able to do it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I hope that I felt like that was clarifying. So round two, each of you has a question that you've already seen, and I'll read it aloud. And it's a question for each one separately. So the first one goes to Michelle Serra, and the question is, as you know, the Northampton Youth Commission sponsored Plastic Reduction and Sustainability Ordinance passed the City Council this year, implementing new regulations on the use of disposable plastics by businesses. While it is a significant step forward, other ordinances to make Northampton more sustainable will certainly be necessary. If elected, will you commit to working with the Youth Commission to create additional ordinances to protect our climate and environment?
Absolutely. I would be honored to work with the Youth Commission. One of the things that gives me hope, in fact, regarding the climate crisis is our youth, our young people, and it gives me hope that we will, I hope, be giving 16-year-olds the vote. Climate is for municipal elections, just to clarify. Climate is a top issue for young people. In fact, in red, blue, and purple states, it's a top issue for young people today. They're an inspiration. So I want to encourage them to keep asking tough questions. And I feel that involving our youth in Northampton is critical to our success. So I'm in favor of youth-led advocacy and absolutely working with the Youth Commission. And I feel that they, I feel that they can work together, work within the community, work with the city government. So I feel that we have a wonderful opportunity in working with the Youth Commission. So I'd be, very interested. Yes.
Great, thank you. So the next question is for David Murphy. Knowing that local responses are insufficient for addressing catastrophic climate change, in what specific ways will you help Northampton forcefully advocate for bolder, science-based climate and environmental policies at the state and federal level? What policies do you feel are most urgent right now? Please speak to your previous legislative record on such issues.
Well, previously, I think the biggest things we did during my time on the council were probably the stretch code, was probably changing, that was building code stuff, was adopted under state statute, was probably changing zoning to allow for large scale photoelectric stuff, and also changing taxation, the way we tax them. They're taxed as personal property, not necessarily as real estate. So that in the past is probably what we did. I think the level that we need to deal with, because this is an international issue, is probably at the federal level. and dealing internationally. I mean, when you look at the European Union, when you look at this country and places like Japan, we're actually taking this seriously, and trying to do our best in comparison with the rest of the world. But when you deal with places like India and China and the continent of Africa that are developing, they got other priorities, and they really do have other priorities. And because we're one big biosystem, what they do has effect on us. I mean, what we do in Northampton pales in comparison to the international level. And I think that's where we have to take the action. And we have, I'm very sure that our congressperson and our two senators at the national level are very committed to this. And in that sense, I think we need to support their efforts in that area. I just don't know what effect, what effect is John Kerry going to have on China? In a developing the whole continent of Africa is developing. 40% of the world's population doesn't have adequate energy. They're going to take a coal plant to get electricity before they're going to worry about what our problems are with climate change. And the same thing with India. That's a very large third world nation that's a democracy that's developing. How do we convince those international players to actually deal with this in their own jurisdictions to help us out? Because they're just not committed.
So I'm going to take the moderator's point of privilege to ask a follow-up. So you're focused, the way you've described the problem, you've kind of focused on mitigation of the problem, who's going to cut back on carbon emissions. But as you say, the climate is going in this direction as it's going, and as a city, we're limited. So what would you do, both in this case, advocating at the federal and state level and in Northampton to deal with the adaptation and the preparation respect of climate change? It's coming, what shall we do?
That's true. I'm running for city councilor, not Congress or Senate. So I've got to deal with what I can do in Northampton. And I mean, to mitigate it, to some extent, it's going to be a combination of both trying to get national, international players to deal with it, but it's also going to be, how do we accommodate the fact that maybe we don't reach our goals? Maybe we do see a 3% Celsius grade increase when we want 1.5. How do we adapt ourselves to that? As a species, we've been adapting forever and ever to things from the ice age to, the climate is always changing. Weather changes more, but climate has been changing. I think we have to look at, hey, if we don't make these goals, what do we do? Because I think there's a very good chance that we're not going to get where we want to be when we want to be there, being totally realistic. I think we've got to come up with how do we adapt as much as how do we try to reach our goals.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next question goes to Marissa Elkins. As you know, climate disruption disproportionately harms people marginalized by race, class, gender, and ability, and marginalized people are also less likely to hold elected positions, sit on commissions, attend public forums, and vote. As a city councilor, how would you meaningfully involve people most harmed by climate chaos and environmental degradation?
So I'm really glad this question was asked to me. It was on the list, and I'm glad that I'm able to answer it. First of all, I think this goes far beyond what we're talking about here. It implicates every facet of municipal government in the city and across this country. Look, I'm committed to working to address the barriers within city government that make it difficult, if not impossible, for everybody in our community to participate and assume roles of leadership that want to. And we need to be working to make more people want to show them that their voice matters and that they have a say-so in what happens in the city. There is, starkly and frankly, there is a lack of diversity throughout Northampton's various councils and committees and commissions, and I would work from the council and with the next mayor to identify, support, and empower people of color and marginalized people to participate and lead in every facet of our government. I would insist as city councilor that we as a city do everything we can to eliminate the barriers such as economic and housing instability, lack of childcare, inadequate physical and mental health care resources that prevent people from participating in municipal government. And as I said before, ask it every time with every choice, with everything we're considering, is what we're doing equitable? Is it resilient? Is it furthering our goals and our priorities as a city. And I think from the position of city council, that's the most, and it's everything that we can do, and it's everything we must do.
Thank you. Okay, the next question goes to Jamila Gore. To prepare for the climate, we are already seeing, right? We're already seeing hotter summers, stronger and heavier storms, periodic droughts, etc. And enable us to transition to a zero carbon economy, we will need streets that offer better shade, manage stormwater, reduce and withstand power outages, move people around safely with clean transit options, and provide energy sources other than natural gas for heating and cooling adjacent buildings. Do you agree in whole or in part with this description of the needed infrastructure? And if so, how does this influence your view of the current design of option 3 of Northampton's Main Street? And please be specific.
So I agree with all of that. And I support the design option 3. And I think it could be taken further. I think it could be more climate friendly, more pedestrian friendly, could bring more public transportation, more access to the downtown for bicyclists, for people in wheelchairs. If we got rid of, the slanted parking and had parallel parking, we could just get rid of a lot of the carbon emissions that come through town. And I have worked with the Main Street for Everyone group, because I believe that their take on design 3, to take it a little further, to have a canopy of trees above Main Street, would be a great addition to make our Main Street more beautiful, to make it more welcoming to people, and to make it more climate friendly. So I think that, taking option 3 to even another level would really improve our sustainability as a city, and would improve our businesses as a city. I mean, just for people to be able to walk around downtown and be in the shade, or for people to be able to eat, out in front of their favorite restaurant. And, I really enjoyed how Strong Avenue was closed off this summer. It was really beautiful how you could go out there and traffic wasn't, going by. And so I think more things like that in downtown Northampton could really improve like the livelihood of some of the businesses, could improve our city and how people like to visit and come and see what we have to offer as far as restaurants and dining and shops and things like that. So I think option 3 is good, and we could go even further with that.
Great, thank you very much. And the last question goes to Michael Quinlan. So old natural gas pipes under Northampton streets have sprung thousands of leaks into our soil and air over the past 2 decades. In addition to the risk of gas explosions, unburned methane causes silent damage to human lungs and to street trees, as well as to the atmosphere as a potent greenhouse gas. Currently, there are 40 active gas leaks in Northampton, according to a publicly available information. Other cities have formed gas leak task forces to educate the public, increase resident gas detection, and ensure the gas company makes prompt repairs and mitigates negative impacts. How will you improve monitoring of and response to our gas leaks? And how will you help lead Northampton's transition away from natural gas?
Thank you. I thought about this question a lot. I'm glad to get it, actually, because I looked on the at the Arlington Gas Leak Task Force website. I was interested in that, but knowing that we don't have one today, I thought to myself, what could we do in Northampton now if we don't create that? And I think we need, the mayor to either instruct our energy coordinator or planning and sustainability, or maybe even the fire department, to engage with the gas company to demand safety for our community first. We must make it very clear we won't allow for something like what happened in the Merrimack Valley, for instance, to happen here. The other thing that I think we have to do, I would just note that in the Main Street redesign, Main Street for Everyone plan, there's a proposal for bold action to create a clean energy system, for downtown. And I think that's the kind of bold action we would need to take. And I would look forward to advocating for such a thing. The other thing I think we should be thinking about strongly is investing in infrastructure to allow for alternative and renewable energy sources, such as solar, battery powered. There's a resident of Ward 1 that has 2 large batteries powering their home. And when the power goes out, that house stays going. And I think that's the kind of thing we have to think about municipally as well, maybe in our public housing as well, because I think, quite frankly, we need to be able to protect people that are our most marginalized here. And if we can invest in battery powered energy for these homes so that when it's hot, the air conditioning stays on, when it's cold, the heat stays on, and when your refrigerator stays on, because people that maybe can't afford to go to the grocery store to replace spoiled groceries, we have to protect them. So these are things that are on my mind around specifically the gas leaks and advocating for cleaner energy sources. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we're on to round 3, and this is a chance. If you didn't like the question I asked you, you get to pick a different question and answer that one. And if you would like, I can read that question again for you, or you can just address it. So I am going to call on you in the original order that I was calling on you, and you can state which question you're answering. So first we'll go to Michelle Sarah.
Well, there are several. It's going to be just one, but there'll probably be another chance. All right. Well, I'll take the was on our list as question 5.
Is this the natural gas one?
No, which I could also, comment on, but this was climate disruption disproportionately harming people marginalized by race, class, gender, and ability. And yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So now you've selected, I'll start the timer again. Here you go.
Okay. So I feel we need to engage far more with community outreach to all residents, and especially marginalized communities. We can't be effective in an echo chamber, and that's been an issue for Northampton. So we're, we need to make progress. We need to involve working people who might be juggling several jobs to make ends meet. They're raising kids. Meet them where they are, ask them how we might, adjust meeting times to allow for their participation. So this is in terms of, attending forums, meetings, and just being, included in our outreach more. And perhaps involving youth commission in this, where that could perhaps be effective, engaging high school students if we're not connecting with the parents, the houseless community. I agree with the housing first approach, and having a staff person to provide outreach and connect our houseless community with services, to do our research and learn from other communities and individuals across the socioeconomic spectrum about expanding these opportunities for engagement.
Great, thank you. So Michael Quinlan, is there a question you'd like to choose to answer?
Yeah, I will choose. In what specific ways would you help Northampton forcefully advocate for bolder science-based climate and environmental policies at the state and federal level? And what policies do you feel are most urgent? Now, I started on this in the previous question about natural gas, but I think we have to invest in infrastructure that will allow for the creation of renewable energy. We know the sun provides virtually unlimited supply of clean and free fuel. The opportunity to harvest that supply can sometimes be difficult. I had a friend recently tell me a story that when he and his family were ready to invest in solar for their home, they were told by National Grid that they would have to pay for a new transformer for their street, which was going to add about 30% to the cost of the project. Keep in mind, this was not a transformer for just them. Every house on the street would have use of the additional transformer. I think we have to work with our state government to get our electric grid to a place where people are not priced out of this important investment. I mentioned that I recently also spoke to a resident who powers the house with 2 batteries, 2 large batteries, but larger than a microwave oven each. He has solar and access to the grid to charge these batteries. And he, again, as I mentioned before, he can be sure that his house will be able to operate at full power, even during a power outage. And I believe that we have to think about this sort of investment for our community, knowing that the weather is getting more harsh, knowing that people are facing, crises when there's an incredible storm, or just even a windstorm. And so I think we have to invest in things like this. We have to advocate for this with our state government, and we have to upgrade the electric grid to allow for such investment. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, David Murphy, is there a question you'd like to answer?
Actually, I'm going to be bold and take a shot at 2 questions. First one is question 5, relative to marginalized people and their housing issues relative to energy. And one of the things I need to point out that we use zoning to bring in the stretch code, but the stretch code made the cost per square foot of construction more expensive. So it made housing more expensive. So, I mean, everything is connected here. There are unintended consequences of everything. We want the stretch code, we do the stretch code. It makes housing more expensive, which makes it harder on marginalized people to afford housing. So we can't lose track of the fact that everything is somehow connected and there are unintended consequences of the decisions that we make. We offer solar vehicle rebates or electric vehicle rebates. They work really good on Teslas for 6-figure income people, but try and buy a used Prius and get a rebate. You can't. We have to be very, very conscious of that. The other thing that I would like to take a crack at is question 9. A home rule petition to do away with fossil fuel combustion in buildings. Greenhouse gas, electrical generation, transportation, and industry are the 3 big sources of that. Until we come up with a way to make electricity without burning fossil fuels, it's a fool's errand to say, we're going to make you put electrical heating systems in your building and then make somebody else burn the fossil fuels to make the electricity to run that. Everything is connected and there are unintended consequences. We have to be aware of that when we make these decisions. We make things more expensive to make them more energy efficient, or we say you can't burn natural gas to heat your building, you have to use electricity, and then we burn the natural gas. Renewables are great. Renewables are also intermittent. California and Texas prove that to us. You need guaranteed sources of power, guaranteed sources of electricity if you're going to add things to the grid.
Great, thank you. And Jamila Gore, is there one of these questions you'd like to answer? And feel free to respond to the others too.
I'll answer the question about the Youth Commission.
Okay.
I, as a city councilor, if I am elected, I would love to work with the Youth Commission. Our Youth Commission is very active in a lot of ways, and I'm very impressed with all the things that they do. They've been working to get the voting age to 16 for a very long time, and I've been very impressed with that. And also the things that they've done for climate change. These are like long processes of things. Like first it was the plastic straw ban, and now it's like plastic bag ban, and now it's all plastics. They just kind of continue to work at it. And even though it's a long haul kind of process, sometimes through city government, they've continued to push for what they want. And I think that that's important because youth are at the forefront of the effects of climate change. And I think that we need to be responsible to them as adults, as leaders, to listen to their voices and listen to what they want to be done about climate change. And we need to act quickly in that way. And we owe it to them to act a little faster than we have, honestly, I feel like. So if I get on council, I would like to be a person more of acting fast on these climate issues and things that the Youth Commission bring up. Because I feel like, they go through all of high school working for one issue and it might not even come through until they get out of high school. So I think it's important to to really listen to the Youth Commission, because they really work hard and they really have a lot of great priorities that help the whole city. I mean, honestly, it helps all of us, some of their ideas. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Marissa Elkins last, but certainly not least. Feel free to answer any one of these questions. And if you want to, you can also respond to some of the other candidates' comments.
So I would also like to answer question 9, which asks about the home rule petition to the legislature to disallow fossil fuel combustion. And so the short answer is I'd always consider it, because I'm ultimately hopeful that ultimately electricity will be powered by renewables over fossil fuels in the long run, and hopefully in the relatively short run. And if we're to meet or exceed the benchmarks in the plan, we're going to have to be creative and look for other opportunities to make bigger changes. I'd know that there are cities applying, Brooklyn and Concord and Lexington, and to the extent that they've had a head start with this kind of idea, I'd be watching them closely to see how their efforts play out. But it's telling to me that these are comparatively wealthy cities, and I think we need to have our eyes wide open to the effects that such requirements would have on our already critical housing shortage in the city. I'd share that my parents moved here from Texas. I'd describe them. It's very much the case that climate change was a part of the reason why they are moved here from their lifelong home. The hurricanes, the floods. It was literally the case that my parents were without power when the failure grid, and it was a non-hypothetical possibility that they could freeze to death in their own home in the United States of America. And so they are here, but they couldn't afford to move to Northampton. I'm delighted to have them 10 minutes down the road in Holyoke. I would have loved to have had their votes, but their experience was hardly unique. We have to be real about how these measures that we would take, as much as we want them, can affect the housing market. And at the affordable housing level where we're subsidizing and we can do things to incentivize, that's great. But that median level of what I would call attainable housing, there's a real factor there that we need to be sensitive to and have our eyes open to. So I would say I would consider it, but we need to be clear-eyed about it.
Great, thank you. So now is the time when we get to ask audience questions. So this will be a free-for-all. I guess you should raise your hand if you want to answer the audience questions. So all of you can answer, or only some of you who want to answer can. So Nancy Pullen asks, soon the city will begin to receive major funding from the Regional Transportation Climate Initiative, TCI. What are your top priority transportation initiatives? Please do not talk about bike paths. We need far larger, more aggressive actions than bike paths to reduce carbon emissions from transportation. Anyone want to take that? Okay, Marissa.
And if I can, was it the top 3 things?
What are your top priority transportation initiatives?
Oh, good. I'm glad to not have to give a specific number, but I think that we very much need to look at partnerships regionally and with the state to particularly on the issue of rail, the north-south commuter rail. We need to continue expansion of that, and there's been great work. It's a huge factor for those of us who have to work up and down the 91 corridor. I also think east-west to Boston is huge for our participation in Western Mass in state government at that level. So that is, I think, it's a significant priority that I would be happy to see our government working on, both within the at the professional level with our experts working in City Hall, and when by the council, where we can work to foster that and our work there.
Awesome. Okay. So unless someone else wants to also answer the same question, I'll ask a question from, Jamila does. Okay. Fire away.
I just want to say that I would want to improve public transportation. I take the bus, and I know that sometimes it can be really kind of cut off like times of going places and getting places. So I think improving the PVTA system would really help locally to have more transportation options for people. So maybe they wouldn't have to take their car everywhere. And I think that could be a big improvement in, lessening carbon emissions.
Great, thank you. Oh, David would also like to answer a transportation question.
Since I've been Mr. Unintended Consequences tonight, I'll throw these out there. Rail, ridership is important on rail. You've got to have a certain amount of ridership because we can't forget those nice trains run big diesel motors to make electricity to power the train. So, and diesel is nasty stuff when you burn it. So when you're going to set up a rail line, you got to make sure you have the ridership to offset the fact that you're burning diesel fuel to make electricity to run the train. So you don't want to be running a train with nobody on it because it's worse than other sources of transportation. And then relative to housing, particularly East-West Rail, nobody's talked about that. But in my real estate experience, if you make it easier for people collecting Boston-sized salaries to move to Western Massachusetts and commute to Boston, you're going to crank up the housing prices in Western Massachusetts because they're going to be competing with local buyers making local salaries, buying houses here, only they got Boston-based salaries and they're riding the train back and forth. So the unintended consequences of that is you're going to crank up the housing prices even more because the people you're competing with to buy houses in Northampton are going to be collecting Metro Boston salaries. So be very, very careful about East-West Rail. I know Senator Lesser would like very much to take the train to the State House, but the unintended consequences of bringing all those nice Bostonians to Western Mass is you're going to have to compete with them to buy houses out here, and they got more money than you do. So don't lose track of that. Thanks.
So I'm kind of mindful of the desire to not repeat the same thing. So Marissa, is this a response to a previous counselor candidate's answer? Yeah, okay, in that case, yeah, why don't we give you a minute to respond?
I just want to briefly say that the part of the reason why East-West Rail is I believe is important is not because of people from the East coming here to live here. It is so that we will have regional equity and we can get those jobs there. And so I'll take my chances with the housing market. I would like more opportunity for those of us here to also contribute in our state's capital.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask another audience member's question, but Nancy got a lot of mileage out of that one. So Tina Ingman asks, gas-powered small engine lawn tools like leaf blowers, especially two-stroke engine models, spew toxic pollution, including greenhouse gases, not to mention noise pollution. In one study, 1 hour of commercial gas leaf blower polluted the same amount of emissions as driving a gas Toyota Camry 1,100 miles. The battery-run versions of these tools are far less polluting. Would you support an ordinance to reduce Northampton's pollution from the use of these tools by the city, commercial landscapers, residents, or all three? What might it look like? So any takers on that question? Michael.
Yeah, I think you see in Northampton, a solar-powered, commercial company that does all this lawn care, right? Electrocut Lawn Care does this with solar-powered, battery-powered machines. So I do think this is very realistic for the city. I mean, this is how we mow our lawn here. We have a battery-powered mower here that we recharge, here at our home. And I think this is very realistic. I think it's something that could be accomplished. Like electric vehicles, right? Where this is something that we talk about, electric vehicles for the city fleet. The DPW, the fire department, they have concerns that vehicles that they need to get their jobs done, there's not the technology there to do that electrically yet. But with these small engine items, there certainly is. So I think this is very interesting and something that is absolutely accomplishable.
Great. Does anyone else want, Michelle also wants to take it.
Yeah, just in terms of, we do have the options for, battery powered, for rechargeable these garden tools. And I believe the question made reference to the small ones. I mean, there are the commercial landscapers, but also homeowners. I mean, and I know some people are concerned about the noise decibel level. I mean, they're very noisy. People are blowing their leaves around instead of raking, and this kind of thing. So I think that there are a lot of things that on the commercial side and the residential side that we want to educate people on. I'm not sure about an ordinance. I would certainly be open to the conversation, but just in terms of how we're maintaining not using chemicals and avoiding these gas powered equipment, and especially the very loud ones. So I think that this is something that residents are concerned about.
Great, thank you. David, you also want to address the mowers?
Oh, absolutely. If I was on the council, what I'd ask the sponsor is, who's going to enforce this ordinance? Going to have the weed whacker police? We already cut $1 million from them. Who's going to go enforce this ordinance? When you got to think about that when you're legislating. Is this enforceable? How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to, who's going to go tell somebody running a gas-powered weed whacker they have to stop? And how effective is that going to be? I mean, we can't stop people from smoking marijuana in Pulaski Park. Who the hell is going to stop people from running gas-powered weed whackers in their backyard? If I was on council, that's what I'd ask the sponsor. What's going to happen with this? Or is it just one more thing we're going to put on the ordinance books that we can't enforce?
Okay. Does anyone else want to address this one, or I can ask some other audience questions? Okay. So Susan Thuberge asks, what does climate justice mean to you? How will you integrate that concept into your work on City Council? Jamila?
So, like I said before, climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, it's all combined to me. And for me being on council, representation matters. And for me having a voice on council would really be a historic thing and a very important thing to have a woman of color on the council. I think that, climate change, and since people that are racially in different groups have been disproportionately affected by climate change, I think it's important that those groups are represented more. And another way that we could get them in the conversation is to perhaps pay people to be on commissions or give their input to these discussions, these larger discussions on climate that they're often left out of. So I think it's really important to be inclusive in the conversation.
Okay. Michelle, you also want to answer the same question?
Yes, please. So I want to point out that what climate justice is in part, and I'm also going to kind of connect it to a couple of points that I'd like to just follow up on from some previous questions. For example, on the our codes and housing prices increasing, we have to think about what the life cycle costs are for a building's energy, and for a new homeowner, and for an affordable home. So the upfront costs are greater, but a lot of people, when they have all the information and understand that if we don't implement the energy saving features upfront, that there is going to be a greater cost over the long run, or the life cycle of the home, the apartment, the commercial building. So that's important. And I feel that, you know, in the work that Habitat has done, there was a lot of concern about, well, if we spend more, even if it's a little more, you know, will the homeowner be able to afford it? But, you know, we're making the home more affordable long term. So we have to think of everything. And I do appreciate David, you know, playing devil's advocate and, you know, pros and cons to everything, you know, of course, but we really have to look at this with the long view. It's not, you know, and affordability is very important, and it's definitely a concern.
Right. Well, I was trying to give 2 minutes to each person, so I'm gonna wrap that up. So I'm going to ask a question asked by David Starr. From what I've been told, the city has been incinerating our garbage recently, which released terrible chemicals into our environment. I'm guessing this choice is made because it's cheaper than burying the garbage in a landfill. Should we be making environmental choices based on the least financially expensive option? Do you think Northampton's residents' preference would be based on the least financially expensive option should the environmental impact be considered? Does anyone want to take that one? Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth noting that in the solid waste stream, that we were in a position where a lot of our recyclables were being paid for, and now we're paying for those. So I think, you know, this is a difficult question to answer because it's one that specific enterprise has faced some turmoil in terms of its you know, financial state. That said, I do believe that David, to your point, David Starr, to your point, this is not always about finance, right? Sometimes our moral compass has to guide our decision making, and so I think it's worth noting that we should not be making these decisions solely based on finance. It is important. It is a part of the discussion, but I agree with you. And I said this at the beginning. I think this community is led by activists that drive the municipal operation, you know, to a more conscience-laden decision-making process. So I do think we should be thinking about that, and it's an important part of the discussion.
Great. Does anyone, David, you want to take this question as well?
Because when I was on the council, we used to have a landfill. In fact, we used to make $500,000 a year with our landfill, and we had control and knew exactly what was happening with our solid waste. We dealt with it in accordance with state regulations, and we had control of it, and we actually showed a profit with it. But the council voted at that time to get out of that business and put it in diesel trucks and drive it a long way to get rid of it. And we lost control of what happens to it. So now all the stuff that used to go to Glendale Road now goes in a diesel truck to Chicopee or God knows where, and they do other things with it. But the council in the past specifically chose to give up the control of that and put it in diesel trucks and drive it 30, 40 or more miles away to get rid of it. And we lost control of what happens to it. You know, that was a council decision. I was around when it happened. I didn't necessarily agree with it, but that was the enlightened decision at the time.
Okay, that was informative. Does anyone else want to answer this particular question? Otherwise, I'll go on to Alyssa Klein's question. Okay, so Alyssa Klein asks, where would you land regarding the removal of forest for the installation of large-scale commercial solar arrays? And anyone can take this. Michelle, okay.
Yes, so I would not be in favor of clear cutting a forest to install a, you know, solar panel, a large scale installation. I think that is a common sense, you know, concern. There's been, you know, we've seen this happen where you know, we don't want to, you know, I'm not in favor of that. So yeah.
Okay. David, you also want to address this one?
Yeah, because I actually dealt with it, and Lily can attest to this because she was engaged in this. When I was on the Legislative Matters Committee, this very thing came up with regards to putting in solar and cutting timberland to put in solar. And what was the trade-off going to be? Because obviously the solar was advantageous, but so was the timber we were removing. And Lily will remember this, that there were recommendations, and I made a fuss on the Legislative Matters Committee that both sides of this need to meet with Carolyn Mission, the planning department, and work out what they thought was a good compromise for this. But generally speaking, I am not in favor of removing standing timber for this. There's places to put it. I'm sure there's places to put it that don't result in cutting timber. But in that case, we more or less insisted that the solar people and the forestry people get together and work out a compromise, that it shouldn't be politically settled at the council, but that the two interested parties who both had environmental issues at heart work out what they thought was a reasonable compromise. And I think Lily probably remembers that, and I know she's watching, but very pleased with the fact that it didn't get solved politically. It didn't get solved legislatively. It got solved by the interested parties getting together with the planners and working out a number that worked for both of them. And I was very pleased with that.
Okay. So we're nearing the end, but Marissa, you want to answer this question as well?
I would just briefly say that it's also the case that I don't agree with large scale cutting for solar, just primarily because the science doesn't really support it. The net offset of carbon capture versus the solar, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. We deal with it on a smaller level all the time with individual houses and the ways that developers on projects are able to cut down 1 or 2 trees to allow for solar. But I would oppose that, and I think that we can legislate a preference for that between individual developers, so they're not just working it out, but that our city's preference for that, because I hear everybody just stated that preference. I think that answered the question, that we value, that we don't think that offset works, and so we should we should make that what the preference is and how it's carried out.
Okay. So we have 2 minutes left, and I'm not sure that that's enough time to get everyone a chance to answer yet another question. So if anyone wants to take a crack at this question, say so, and otherwise I'm going to close this forum. Okay. Well, thanks to our candidates and the 129 audience members who joined us tonight. Thanks also to Northampton Open Media, that's northamptonopenmedia.org, for live streaming and recording this event. All questions, including those not asked live during this forum, will be forwarded to the candidates, giving them the opportunity to answer in writing. Their answers will be posted at climateactionnow.ma.org. This Thursday at 7 p.m., Climate Action Now will host a second candidate forum for the Northampton mayoral candidates. And if you give me a second here, I'm going to share the closing slide. And September 28th. You can vote early this week at the Senior Center and again in the general election on Tuesday, November 2nd. Thank you and good night.